The USS Halcyon's control room hummed with the kind of tension that makes seasoned sailors nervous. Lieutenant Neil Darby stood rigid at the helm, his knuckles white against the console as he delivered the words no one wanted to hear. "Sir, we've lost propulsion. Complete system failure." Captain Elise Brannan felt her stomach drop. The Halcyon, $4.3 billion of cutting-edge naval engineering, had become a floating paperweight 120 miles off the coast of San Diego. What was supposed to be a routine 5-day training exercise had turned into a nightmare that could end careers. Defying complete failure, Lieutenant. Main hybrid unit shut down. Manual restart failed. She's not responding to backup protocols. Darby's voice cracked slightly. "We're dead in the water, ma'am." The silence that followed was broken only by the low hum of emergency power and the distant sound of Chief Engineer Bradley Tennyson cursing softly at his diagnostic station. He'd been hunched over those screens for 4 hours straight, and the frustration was eating him alive. This wasn't just any ship. The Halcyon represented the future of naval warfare, a hybrid propulsion system combining electric turbines, gas engines, and an adaptive AI interface that monitored engine health in real time. Only a handful of engineers had clearance to work on it. The technology was so advanced that the installation had been classified, the specifications locked away in digital vaults that required 3 different security clearances just to access. But all that brilliance meant nothing now. Day 1, the best and brightest. In the engine room, 10 of the Navy's finest engineers, both military and civilian contractors, surrounded the silent hybrid core like surgeons around a patient who'd flatlined. The air was thick with the smell of burned rubber from the last emergency restart attempt, and every face showed the same mixture of confusion and growing panic. "Run the diagnostic sequence again," Commander Raj Patel ordered, though they'd already done it 6 times. The tall, methodical officer had overseen the installation of this exact system type on 3 other vessels. He knew every bolt, every circuit, every line of code, but right now, he felt like he was staring at an alien artifact. Hannah Yuan, the lead civilian systems engineer, looked up from her tablet with dark circles under her eyes. "Sir, the diagnostics keep coming back clean. According to every sensor we have, this system should be running perfectly." "But it's not running at all," muttered Dr. James Crawford, the MIT-trained AI specialist they'd flown in specifically for this mission. His reputation preceded him, the man who designed fault-tolerant systems for 3 major defense contractors. But even he looked lost. The younger engineers whispered among themselves. Some suggested it might be a software glitch. Maybe they needed to completely wipe and reinstall the AI interface. Others thought it could be a hardware failure in one of the sealed components they couldn't access without dry dock facilities. "What about the cooling system?" asked Petty Officer D'Angelo Morris, the youngest member of the team. At 22, he was still new enough to ask questions the veterans had stopped asking. Dr. Crawford barely looked up. "Kid, we've checked everything twice. This isn't about cooling. This is about integrated systems failure at a level we've never seen before." Morris fell silent, properly chastened, but something in his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. As night fell on the first day, Captain Brannan called an emergency briefing. The senior staff gathered in the cramped conference room, the weight of failure pressing down on them like the ocean above. "Gentlemen, lady," she began, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "I need options. Real ones." Commander Patel cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we've exhausted every protocol in the manual. The system appears to be locked in some kind of defensive mode, but we can't determine why or how to override it." "The AI interface isn't responding to administrative commands," Dr. Crawford added. "It's like the system doesn't trust any inputs we're giving it." Brannan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean air. "Are you telling me our own ship doesn't recognize us?" "That's one way to put it, ma'am." Day 2, pride before the fall. By the second day, word had begun to leak up the chain of command. Admiral Clarence Pike, a 37-year veteran who'd earned his reputation through quiet competence rather than political maneuvering, received the first official report at 0800 hours. Pike sat in his office at Naval Base Point Loma, reading through the technical details with growing concern. The report was professionally written, full of proper terminology and careful language, but between the lines, he could see the panic. The Navy's newest jewel was broken, and nobody knew why. His first instinct was to send more experts. Within hours, 3 additional civilian contractors were helicopter-lifted to the Halcyon, specialists in hybrid propulsion, advanced diagnostics, and AI systems integration. Each arrived with confidence and left with confusion. "Sir," the lead contractor reported via secure satellite link, "we're looking at a completely unprecedented failure mode. The system appears to be functional at every level we can test, but it refuses to engage." Back on the ship, the mood was deteriorating. The mess hall conversations had dried up. Sailors went about their duties with the mechanical precision of people trying not to think about their situation. The Halcyon had become a prison of embarrassment, floating dead in international waters, while the Navy's best minds scratched their heads. In the engine room, Maid, "If you are enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means a lot to us. We are just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you." And tensions were starting to fray. Dr. Crawford had begun snapping at junior engineers who asked too many questions. Commander Patel found himself double-checking work he'd already verified 3 times. Even Hannah Yuan, normally unflappable, had developed a nervous habit of tapping her stylus against her tablet. "We're missing something fundamental," Patel muttered to himself, crouched beside an access panel he'd opened and closed a dozen times. "Something basic. Maybe we're overthinking it," Morris suggested quietly, earning sharp looks from 2 senior engineers. "Kid," said Riley Brent, a cocky civilian contractor with 3 degrees and an attitude to match, "this isn't some outboard motor you fix with duct tape. This is quantum-level engineering." Morris nodded and went back to his assigned busy work, but his eyes kept drifting to parts of the engine assembly that everyone else seemed to ignore. The basic components, the simple things. Admiral Pike made his decision at precisely 0815 hours on the 3rd day. He'd read the overnight reports, seen the mounting list of failed attempts, and felt the weight of political pressure beginning to build from Washington. Someone was going to hang for this failure, and Pike was determined it wouldn't be his people, at least not if there was another option. "Get me Raymond Ellis," he told his assistant without looking up from the reports. The young officer paused. "Sir, I don't show anyone by that name in our current consultant database." "That's because he's been retired for 8 years. Find him." Pike remembered Ellis from a deployment to Bahrain in 2003. A power grid failure had threatened to shut down the entire base, leaving them vulnerable in the hostile territory. While the electrical engineers ran diagnostics and called for parts, Ellis, then just a senior petty officer, had disappeared into the maze of conduits beneath the base. 2 hours later, power was restored. Ellis emerged covered in grease and seawater, carrying nothing but a notebook and a handful of improvised tools. When the base commander asked how he'd done it, Ellis simply said, "The grid was scared. Had to convince it to trust us again." Everyone thought it was just colorful language from an enlisted man. Pike wasn't so sure. The phone call found Raymond Ellis in his garage in Norfolk, Virginia, elbows deep in the guts of a 1968 Johnson outboard motor. The space smelled of oil, salt, and decades of honest work. Tools lined the walls, some modern, some ancient, all carefully maintained. This was where Ellis had spent his retirement, fixing things that other people threw away. "This is Raymond," he answered, not bothering to check the caller ID on the landline that rarely rang. "Chief Ellis, this is Admiral Clarence Pike. You remember me?" Raymond straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. "Pike, Bahrain, the power grid that had a nervous breakdown." Pike allowed himself a small smile. "That's right. Raymond, I need you. I'm retired, Clarence. Have been for 8 years. The Halcyon's down, dead in the water. We've thrown everything at her. MIT engineers, AI specialists, the works. Nothing." Raymond was quiet for a long moment, processing. He'd read about the Halcyon in trade magazines. A beautiful piece of engineering, but complex beyond reason. The kind of ship that impressed congressmen and worried mechanics. What makes you think I can help? Because they're all trying to outthink the system, Pike said. I need someone who can feel it. Another pause. Raymond looked around his garage, at the simple tools, the straightforward problems, the life he'd built away from the complexity of modern naval engineering. I don't wear the uniform anymore, Clarence. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to help us fix a mistake. A mistake we're all too proud to admit we. Raymond didn't say yes immediately. He hung up, walked outside, and stood in his small yard watching Norfolk go about its business. City buses rolled past. Kids rode bikes between parked cars. Life continued with the mechanical simplicity he'd grown to appreciate. But in his mind, he could see the Halcyon. Not the glossy promotional photos, but the reality. Sailors trapped on a ship that had forgotten how to be a ship. Young engineers blaming themselves for problems they didn't create. Officers watching their careers evaporate over a machine that was too smart for its own good. He called Pike back 10 minutes later. You got a bird ready? Already warming up. The helicopter ride to the Halcyon gave Raymond time to think. He carried only 3 things. His father's wrench, wrapped in oil-stained cloth, a notebook filled with 30 years of engine wisdom, and an old stethoscope that had helped him diagnose problems when computers were still dreams. As the ship grew larger beneath them, Raymond felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Not fear, anticipation. The feeling of walking into a problem that everyone else had given up on. The arrival. The Halcyon's crew watched the helicopter approach with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Word spread that a civilian consultant was coming aboard, but nobody expected the man who stepped off the chopper. Raymond Ellis looked every one of his 62 years. His boots were worn but solid, his jacket faded but functional. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent decades solving other people's problems. But to the young engineers who'd been fighting this battle for 3 days, he looked like somebody's grandfather who'd wandered onto the wrong ship. This is our expert. Riley Brent muttered to a colleague. They sent us a janitor with a toolbox. Captain Brannan met Raymond at the landing pad, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes showing the strain of 3 sleepless nights. Chief Ellis, I'm Captain Brannan. Thank you for coming. Raymond shook her hand with the firm grip of someone who'd spent his life working with his hands. Just Raymond, ma'am, and I didn't come for the Navy. I came for the ship. The diagnosis. The walk to the engine room was quiet except for the sound of boots on metal decking. Raymond didn't ask for briefings or status reports. He didn't want to see diagnostic readouts or system schematics. He just wanted to meet the patient. The engine room was exactly what he'd expected. 10 brilliant people standing around a machine they couldn't understand, their frustration thick enough to cut with a knife. The hybrid core sat silent in the center of it all, a monument to human ingenuity that had somehow become human futility. Show me where she died, Raymond said simply. Commander Patel stepped forward, tablet in hand. The failure occurred in Sector B7 during a routine system check. Voltage collapsed during reinitialization, and we haven't been able to. No, Raymond interrupted gently. Show me. Don't tell me. Patel led him to a section of the engine assembly, pointing to diagnostic panels and explaining the sequence of events. But Raymond wasn't looking at the panels. He was looking at the machine itself, the pipes, connections, the places where theory met reality. He set his notebook aside, pulled out the old stethoscope, and did something that made half the engineers in the room exchange glances. He knelt down, placed the stethoscope against a junction point, and listened. For 30 seconds, nobody spoke. Raymond's eyes were closed, his breathing steady, his entire focus narrowed to whatever he was hearing through that ancient piece of equipment. Finally, he stood up and asked a question that changed everything. Who adjusted the heat sink capacitors after the shutdown? A young technician raised her hand hesitantly. I did, sir. Following standard protocol. Raymond nodded slowly. You followed the protocol exactly? Yes, sir. The manual was very clear. Ma'am, Raymond said, his voice gentle but firm. The protocol was wrong. The problem. The room went silent. Dr. Crawford stepped forward, his voice tight, with barely controlled frustration. Excuse me, but that protocol was developed by some of the finest engineers in the country. It's been tested extensively. Raymond turned to face him, and for a moment, the age difference between them seemed to disappear. What remained was the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical wisdom. Sir, I'm sure it was tested, but was it tested on a system that had already failed, or just on systems that were working fine? Crawford opened his mouth, then closed it. Raymond continued. This machine isn't broken. She's scared. Every time you try to restart her using standard protocols, you're telling her to ignore what she knows went wrong, so she locks you out. He walked over to a section of the hybrid core that everyone had dismissed as secondary systems. With practiced hands, he opened an access panel and pointed to a small component that looked identical to dozens of others throughout the system. That capacitor, he said, is the wrong type. Hannah Yuan looked up from her tablet. That's impossible. We verified every component against the specifications. You verified it against the specifications the Navy received, Raymond replied. But specifications change during development. This relay model was swapped out during prototype testing because it creates a voltage echo when paired with the main interface. The echo confuses the AI, makes it think the system is under attack. Commander Patel frowned. But that would mean, it means your ship has been trying to protect herself from what she thinks is sabotage. And every time you override her safety protocols, you confirm her worst fears. The engineers looked at each other with growing understanding. For 3 days, they'd been fighting their own ship, and the ship had been fighting back. Can it be fixed? Captain Brannan asked. Raymond smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen in days. Ma'am, we just need to speak her language. What followed wasn't the dramatic, Hollywood-style repair montage that movies had trained everyone to expect. Raymond worked slowly, methodically, like a surgeon performing delicate brain surgery. He had Morris retrieve a replacement component from the communications array, a part that was technically identical but had the right electrical characteristics for the hybrid core. While he worked, Raymond talked, not to the engineers, but to the ship herself. Easy now, he murmured, disconnecting power leads with gentle precision. Nobody's trying to hurt you. We just need to fix what's been bothering you. Some of the younger engineers exchanged glances. Talking to machines seemed ridiculous, unscientific. But there was something in Raymond's manner, a certainty born of decades spent in conversation with mechanical systems, that made mockery seem inappropriate. The thing about these new ships, Raymond said to Morris, who was assisting with the replacement, is they're almost too smart. They remember everything, process everything, react to everything. Sometimes they need someone to help them forget the bad experiences. How do you know what she's thinking? Morris asked. Raymond paused in his work, considering the question seriously. Same way you know when a friend is upset, even when they won't tell you what's wrong. You pay attention. You listen. You care about what happens to them. The replacement took 40 minutes. When Raymond finally closed the access panel and stepped back, the hybrid core looked exactly the same as before, but something fundamental had changed. All right, he said quietly. Ask her to start. Don't command her. Ask. Commander Patel approached the main console, his hands trembling slightly as he initiated the startup sequence. This time, instead of forcing an immediate restart, he allowed the system to run through its own diagnostic routine first. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then a low hum filled the engine room, not the angry buzz of a system fighting itself, but the contented purr of machinery doing what it was designed to do. Lights began appearing on diagnostic panels, not the harsh red of air conditions, but the steady green of systems coming online in proper sequence. The hybrid core's main display flickered to life, showing status readings that made Hannah Yuan gasp with relief. She's responding, Patel breathed. All systems showing green. Propulsion interface is online. Up in the control room, Lieutenant Darby felt the ship shift beneath his feet. for the first time in 3 days. The subtle vibration of a vessel under power, the gentle movement that meant they were no longer at the mercy of wind and current. "Ma'am," he called to Captain Brannan, "we have propulsion. All systems nominal." The questions, the celebration in the engine room was subdued but genuine. Engineers who'd been at each other's throats for 3 days shook hands and clapped each other on the back. Morris looked at Raymond with undisguised admiration, while even Dr. Crawford managed a grudging nod of respect. But Riley Brent, the cocky contractor who dismissed Raymond from the beginning, wasn't ready to let it go. "This doesn't make sense," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "How could you possibly know what was wrong? There's no way you just guessed that." Raymond turned to face him, and the room went quiet. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried the weight of experience that couldn't be taught in any classroom. "Son, you ever watch someone bleed out from a pressure burst because the cooling system failed at exactly the wrong second? You ever crawl into a space so tight you dislocate your shoulder, with 40 seconds of oxygen left, because a valve you knew was going to fail finally did?" Brent said nothing. "Then don't talk to me about guessing." I listened. "That's something you can't learn from a textbook or a computer simulation. You learn it by caring more about the machine than your own ego." The rebuke was delivered without anger, but it hit home. Brent looked away, properly chastened, and the rest of the engineers found themselves reconsidering everything they thought they knew about their profession. Captain Brannan stepped forward. "Mr. Ellis, what you did today, you saved this ship. You saved all of us." Raymond shook his head. "Ma'am, I didn't save anyone. I just helped her remember how to trust again." He looked around the engine room, at the faces of engineers who would never forget this moment. The real question is what you're going to do with that knowledge. Before Raymond left the ship, something unexpected happened. Morris approached him during the helicopter prep, carrying a question that had been burning in him for hours. "Sir Raymond, how did you know? Not just about the capacitor, but about the way the whole system would react. None of that's in any training manual." Raymond studied the young sailor's face and saw something he recognized: genuine hunger for knowledge, not just information. The difference between wanting to know and needing to understand. "You've been taught how systems should work," Raymond said. "That's good, that's important. But you also need to learn what they do when they don't work. Machines don't always follow instructions. Sometimes they react, sometimes they adapt, sometimes they protect themselves in ways that look like failures, but are actually intelligence." Morris nodded, absorbing every word. "You want to really understand these systems?" Raymond continued. "Stop reading about them and start listening to them. Get quiet. Don't rush. Let the machine tell you what's wrong instead of assuming you already know." As the helicopter prepared to lift off, Raymond did something that surprised everyone. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the cloth-wrapped wrench, his father's tool, carried through 30 years of naval service. He placed it in Captain Brannan's hands. "This isn't for you," he said. "It's for the next sailor who thinks they're too young to be right or too old to keep learning. Keep it somewhere safe, but don't forget what it represents." Brannan held the tool like it was sacred. "What does it represent?" Raymond smiled. "That sometimes the simplest solutions are the hardest ones to see, and that listening is more important than knowing." The aftermath. The transport helicopter lifted off into the afternoon sun, carrying Raymond back to his garage in Norfolk. Below, the USS Halcyon cut through the water with the smooth confidence of a ship that remembered how to be itself. In the weeks that followed, word of what had happened spread through the naval engineering community in the way that important stories do, quietly, carefully, from one professional to another. The official reports were sanitized, full of technical language and bureaucratic caution. But the real story lived in the conversations between engineers who understood what it meant. Some dismissed it as luck or exaggeration, or the kind of sea story that grows in the telling. Others recognized it as something more important, a reminder that technology, no matter how advanced, is still built by humans and operated by humans, and sometimes needs to be understood by humans in ways that transcend pure technical knowledge. 3 months later, Commander Lien Cho called Raymond from a naval engineering school in Gulfport. "Mr. Ellis, I'm developing a new curriculum for our advanced systems training. I was wondering if you'd be willing to speak with some of our students." Raymond was back in his garage, working on a different outboard motor when the call came. He wiped his hands on the same oil-stained rag and considered the request. "I'm not much for lectures," he said finally. "Not a lecture, just a conversation about the things that don't make it into the manuals." A week later, Raymond found himself in a hangar at the school, sitting in a circle of folding chairs with 20 young engineers. He didn't have slides or charts or prepared remarks, just his notebook and the same patient hands that had listened to machines for 3 decades. "What's the most important thing you ever fixed?" one of the students asked. Raymond thought about the Halcyon, about the power grid in Bahrain, about all the emergencies and failures and moments when technology had needed human wisdom to make it whole again. "My patience," he said finally. "Everything else was just practice." The room went quiet, not from confusion, but from understanding. "You'll panic one day," he told them. "You'll hear a sound you don't recognize, and the system will stop responding, and everyone will look at you. Not at the computer, not at the manual, but at you. And if you let the panic talk first, you'll miss what the machine is really trying to tell you." He opened his notebook, not the new one he'd started after the Halcyon, but the original, yellowed and worn, filled with decades of mechanical conversations. "The good ones," he said, tapping the pages gently. "They listen twice before they touch anything." When the session ended, one of the students, a young woman with grease already under her fingernails, waited until the others had gone. "Do you think machines remember us?" she asked. Raymond chuckled, a sound like old leather creaking. "Maybe. But the better question is, will you remember them?" He left her with the notebook that night, not to keep, but to copy what she needed and add her own discoveries. Because that's how knowledge really travels, not through databases or formal training programs, but through the patient transfer of hard-won wisdom from one pair of experienced hands to another. Back in Norfolk, Raymond's garage resumed its quiet rhythm. The phone rang occasionally. Always someone with an impossible problem, a machine that had given up, a system that needed more than technical expertise to heal. He took some of the calls. Not all of them, just the ones where he could hear, beneath the technical specifications and urgent deadlines, the sound of someone who really cared about fixing things rather than just being right about them. The garage still smelled of oil and salt and honest work. The tools still lined the walls, some modern, some ancient, all ready for whatever problem might walk through the door. And sometimes, late at night when the street outside was quiet and the radio played low, Raymond would open one of his notebooks and add another observation, another hard-learned truth about the conversation between human hands and mechanical hearts. Because the story of the Halcyon wasn't really about a ship or an engine or even about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. It was about the sound of understanding, the quiet moment when human intuition and mechanical need find their common language. It was about listening when everyone else had stopped. And in a world growing ever more complex, ever more automated, ever more convinced that every problem had a digital solution, that might be the most important skill of all. The notebook's pages filled slowly, one truth at a time, waiting for the next person who would need to remember that sometimes the most sophisticated technology in the world just needs someone who cares enough to listen to what it's really saying. In the distance, a ship's horn sounded across the water, not in distress, but in greeting, the sound of a vessel that knew where it was going and trusted the hands that guided it home.